Why does it seem like your spiritual life keeps coming back to the same point? You fast, you pray, you consecrate yourself, but deep down, you feel trapped. As if, no matter how much progress you make, you soon end up back in the same place. A cycle that repeats itself. Always the same thoughts, the same weaknesses, the same attacks. It's as if there were an invisible prison, and you don't even know if you're fighting the devil, the world, or yourself. What if I told you that there is a fast that doesn't free you? Maybe no one has told you this, but fasting in and of itself is not the key to liberation. You can go days without eating, do everything right, and still remain stuck. Why? Because what liberates is not the sacrifice itself, but the obedience that comes with it. And most people are fasting for liberation, but they continue to disobey in the details that really imprison the soul. Have you ever been there? Fasting in anticipation of change, and everything staying the same? Maybe the problem isn't in your effort, but in your focus. There are many people sacrificing their bodies but feeding their pride, denying the food but embracing the pain, and then fasting becomes routine, tradition, a ritual, and not a transformation. And this is where the spiritual battle intensifies. Because when you decide to break the cycle, when you start to see where the root is, hell starts to bother you. This is when the attacks become more subtle, more internal, more emotional, and you think, am I really being transformed, or am I just tired? But what you're about to discover now may surprise you. There is a kind of fasting that moves heaven and shakes hell, a fast that not only takes food off the table, but breaks the chains of the heart, and it begins the moment you stop repeating formulas and start truly obeying. When you understand that God is not looking for perfection, but surrender. Stay with me until the end, because understanding this can be a turning point in your spiritual life. There is deliverance that doesn't come from praying a lot, but from saying yes at the right time. There are doors that do not open because you still want to have control of the key. And there are battles that only end when you stop fighting with the wrong weapons, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. About how to break this cycle, not through the strength of one's arm, but through true surrender. Because what God is looking for is not another vow of fasting, it is a heart that bends without resistance. Now, if this topic resonates with you, if at any point you felt portrayed in this cycle of effort without liberation, leave here in the comments what touched you the most so far. Maybe you don't usually comment on videos, but your experience can help someone who is going through exactly the same battle. And if this content reached you in any way, like this video. It seems like a simple gesture, but it's what makes YouTube understand that this message has value and helps it reach more people who also need to hear it. And of course, if you feel like you need to move further in this direction, if you want to continue receiving messages that confront, awaken, and strengthen, subscribe to the channel now. Here, we are not looking for followers, but for people willing to be truly transformed. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach lives. All of this only makes sense if it is experience, not performance. And speaking of experience, what comes next is even deeper. Because the next step involves something that many people avoid, looking inside with courage and letting God break through what you are still trying to hide. The real reason you feel stuck in this spiritual cycle may be more subtle than it seems. It is not a lack of faith, it is not a lack of seeking. Sometimes it is precisely the excess of movement without direction. You do a lot, but still off course. The body fasts, but the soul insists on negotiating with what should have already been abandoned. And that is where the danger lies, when sacrifice becomes an excuse to continue ignoring what God has already said. Spiritual cycles are often prisons disguised as routine. You wake up with a genuine desire to change, you make decisions, you create spiritual goals, you set fasting days, but in the end, the cycle repeats itself. Because the problem is not the lack of effort, but the lack of specific obedience. Not the religious, mechanical obedience that involves doing everything to check the box, but the kind that hurts the ego, that demands silent renunciation, that forces you to let go of control. The enemy knows this, and he is in no hurry. He would rather you stay busy with whatever seems right, as long as you don't touch the thing that really changes everything. Because while you fast, pray, serve, but continue to resist that specific instruction that the Spirit has already whispered, you are in prison, but with the appearance of freedom. It's like walking on a treadmill. The effort is real, the sweat is real, the exhaustion sets in. But at the end of the day, you're still in the same place. And perhaps this is the greatest spiritual trap of our generation, confusing movement with progress, confusing sacrifice with obedience, confusing intensity with depth. Think about it. How many times have you heard God say something clear and then put it off? How many times have you justified disobedience with phrases like, "It's not the right time yet. God understands my heart. I'm getting ready." But while you put off what has already been revealed, the enemy extends the cycle. He feeds the feeling that everything is fine, as long as you are doing something spiritual. But deep down, he knows you are distracted by the altar while you remain stuck behind the scenes. And this prison has no locks. It is sustained by decisions, by the choice not to change, by emotional dependence on old patterns, by internal agreements that you have not yet had the courage to break. This is why many people fast for freedom, but come out of the fast even more imprisoned, because if the flesh is weak but the soul still resists the truth, the cycle continues. And do you know what's even more dangerous? The longer you spend in this cycle, the harder it becomes. To realize that you're trapped, the prison becomes comfortable, familiar, almost an identity. You start saying things like, "I'm just like this. It's my daily struggle. It's my cross." And this, little by little, kills your faith that something truly new can happen. But God didn't call you to walk in circles. He called you to walk in truth. And truth isn't comfortable. It demands confrontation. It doesn't embrace you where you are. It calls you out. But to get out, you have to do something no one can do for you. Obey what has already been said. It's not waiting for new revelation. It's acting on what you already have. And here comes a profound revelation that many people ignore. The devil can't stop you, but he can convince you to stay still. And how does he do that? By distracting you with spiritual activities that take up your time, but don't confront your soul. He turns fasting into religion, prayer into routine, service into vanity. And all the while, you keep going round and round and round. Now I want to bring you an image that might speak directly to your heart. Imagine a prisoner with the key to his cell in his hands. He holds the key, he looks at the door, he knows how to get out. But he doesn't leave. Why? Because leaving requires more courage than staying. Leaving requires facing the unknown, breaking ties, leaving the comfort of prison to face freedom, which sometimes is more frightening than captivity. And maybe you are right there, with the key in your hands, knowing what needs to be done, having already heard God's voice, having already received direction, but still clinging to fear, guilt, and the false idea that you need to be ready to obey. But obedience never expects readiness. It demands surrender. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject because there is something that needs to be exposed, a hidden truth that keeps many people stuck, even if they are sincere in their faith. But before I go any further, write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too," just so I know this conversation is getting where it needs to go. Now that the key is in your hands, all that's missing is the courage to turn it. And that's where a dangerous confusion comes in that many people make without understanding, thinking that fasting is just about stopping eating. Reducing fasting to a simple physical act is like taking a sword and using it as just a weight in the gym. The spiritual impact of fasting is not in the empty stomach, it is in the surrendered soul. Fasting is not about starving yourself out of pity. It is about saying no to your own will with awareness and direction. It is about putting your body into silence so that your spirit can finally speak. But this only happens when the motivation for fasting is aligned with God's will, not with our own desires for immediate change. Because there are people who fast asking for strength, but still resist what God has already said. They are crying out for deliverance, but they refuse to let go of what is binding them. And this generates a very strong internal conflict. The body suffers from abstinence, but the soul continues to be fueled by pride, fear, vanity, and insecurity. It's like someone trying to swim with an anchor tied to their ankle. No matter how hard they try to move, they'll always sink back down. Fasting without surrender becomes nothing more than a draining sacrifice, a spiritual frustration that fuels guilt, not transformation. And decision-making requires clarity. What you need to understand is that fasting by itself is just a physical pause, but when you fast with purpose, it becomes a direct channel between you and God. It's not about counting how many meals you've missed. It's about asking, Lord, what do you want to change in me during this time? It seems simple, but most people fast without asking this question. And that is why they end their fast exactly the same way they started, empty, frustrated, waiting for something that never comes. Because heaven responds to intentionality, not religiosity. There is no point in stopping eating if you don't. Stop to listen. Fasting without listening is wasted silence. And here's a practice that changes everything. Fast with paper and pen. Literally. When you fast, set aside some time to write things down. Talk to God as if you were expecting an answer. Ask humbly but clearly. And be ready to write down whatever comes up. It may seem like nothing is happening at first, but if you keep your heart open, God will speak. Sometimes He will give you clear direction. Other times He will show you something that is wrong inside of you. Something that you never imagined was holding you back. This is where many people sabotage themselves. They listen, but ignore. Take note, but don't act. And then it goes back to the same old cycle. The prayer was even said. The direction was even given, but the decision was left half-made. Because the truth is that many times the answer that God gives will confront what you like most. It will shake up your comfort zone, your relationships, your choices behind the scenes. And if you don't have the courage to act, the cycle continues. Have you ever stopped to think that maybe the answer you've been waiting for, you already have? That the cycle you're living today is the direct result of something you avoided obeying in the past? It's hard to admit this, but it's at this point that true transformation begins, because understanding this takes you out of the position of spiritual victim and puts you in the place of protagonist of your journey. The fast that changes history is the one that comes from surrender. It's not a cry of despair, it's a conscious surrender. It's looking to God and saying, I don't want to go around in circles anymore. Show me the way, and I'll go. And then comes the practical part. When God shows you, don't overanalyze, don't beat around the bush, don't try to improve His plan. Just obey. It's amazing how God speaks simply when we stop complicating things. But the problem is that most people want a revelation with glamour, light from heaven, a booming voice, when in fact the answer can come in silence in the form of a reminder, a name, or simple direction. It could be a forgive me, a stop that, a go back to where I told you to go. And when you ignore this in the hope of something more spiritual, you lose the chance to break the cycle. Breaking up is not an event, it is a choice, and this choice is usually invisible to outsiders. It is internal, silent, discreet. But the impact it causes, that is huge. It changes the atmosphere, it changes connections, it changes route, it changes you. The truth is that many are looking for strength to continue, when in fact what they need is the courage to stop repeating patterns, to stop feeding the ego, to stop negotiating with hidden sin, to stop using spirituality as a cover for emotional disobedience. You were not called to survive spiritually. You were called to live in newness of life. And newness demands an end to cycles that make you sick, an end to narratives that you yourself created to justify stagnation, an end to excuses disguised as prudence. Because there comes a time when either you take a stand or the cycle repeats itself. And there is no fast that will free you from this if you don't decide. There is no point in waiting for God to do what only you can do. Heaven gives the direction. But the step is yours. The cycle is yours. The key is in your hand. And what stops you from using it is not weakness. It is the fear of what will happen if you are finally free. Because freedom is sometimes scary. It demands responsibility. It demands a new mindset. It demands emotional maturity. That's why some people get used to the cycle because they already know how it works. It's uncomfortable but familiar, painful but predictable. Freedom, on the other hand, demands faith. And faith is not a feeling, faith is movement. And here comes something that few people talk about. There is a level of anointing that can only be accessed after you break the cycle. While you are spinning in the same place, the most you will feel is temporary relief, a momentary motivation. But true transformation comes when you break the pattern with attitude, when you act even without feeling, when you move even without guarantees. Now I want to continue diving into this with you because there is a type of resistance that dresses up as prudence, and it may be preventing you from experiencing everything that God has already prepared. Comment. Here, I don't want to go around in circles anymore. Now follow me on this line of thought. What if the end of your fast is not the end of anything, but the beginning of everything? Many people see the last day of fasting as a finish line, as if victory were guaranteed just by having fulfilled the sacrifice. But in truth, the end of the fast is not the trophy. It's the crossroads. It is there, exactly there, that you choose what you are going to do with everything you heard, felt, wrote, perceived, because there is no point in leaving the fast more consciously and continuing to be disobedient. There is no point in fasting to hear God and then turning a blind eye to everything He has shown you. The real risk is not fasting in vain. The risk is fasting and even so going back to the same place, repeating the same attitudes, maintaining the same excuses, nurturing the same bonds. God does not honor the strongest. God honors the obedient. It has always been this way, from the great names in the Bible to the small decisions that no one sees. Heaven is not impressed by the appearance of spirituality. Heaven responds to the heart that says yes, even when it trembles. The end of the fast is the test of resolve. Because now you can no longer pretend you don't know. God has already shown you. He has already spoken. He has already exposed what needed to be addressed. Now it's no longer about seeking answers. It's about walking with what has been revealed, and that requires a stance that many people avoid: spiritual responsibility. You might even say that you are still waiting for confirmation. But deep down, you know that what you are putting off is not a lack of direction. It is a lack of courage. It is the fear of what will happen if you truly obey. If you break the cycle, if you cut off once and for all what is holding you back. And this is the hidden truth that many people don't want to face. Sometimes it's not the devil who's keeping the cycle alive. It's you, with your justifications, your emotional attachments, your false prudence. Some people hide behind wisdom when in reality they're just postponing a decision they should have made already. God's silence after fasting is not always absence. Sometimes it is confirmation. Because when He has said everything He needed to say, the next sound He expects is the sound of your footsteps, not the sound of your prayer asking for another sign, but the sound of your movement, of your breaking with the old, of your practical response. And it is at this point that you discover whether your fast was a spiritual experience or just another ritual. Because those who fast with understanding end up fasting with purpose. And those who fast out of obligation end up seeking relief. But God didn't call you to ease a guilty conscience. He called you to break with that which prevents you from living what He promised. The true end of the cycle is not the day you stop fasting. It is the day you stop disobeying. Fasting prepares the ground, but you are the one who plants. You are the one who decides what will grow from there. And that is the weight and beauty of spiritual freedom. It always comes with a choice. There are people who fast expecting victory, but they end up sinking into the same routine because they lacked attitude, they lacked the cut, they lacked the movement. The fast stirred their spirit, but it did not change their behavior. And that is why many people go back to walking in circles, because they ignore what God has revealed in their intimacy. But those who break through don't go back to the same place. They don't need to feel something new every day. They live. based on the last clear direction they were given, and they follow it steadfastly, even in silence. They no longer negotiate with the old version of themselves. They no longer sit at the table with the same standards. They no longer harbor the same fears. The mindset changes, the journey changes, because there was obedience where before there were only promises. And when obedience comes in, the cycle needs to go out. There is no way to stay where the yes was truly given. Now I want to push this thread to its limit because there is a kind of silent victory that only happens after the decision. And that is what we are going to talk about next. Comment. Here, I don't go back to the same place. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you has been stirred, and that says a lot about your journey. We don't build this kind of conversation by chance, and if it made sense to you, if it touched on something that needed to be touched on, leave a comment below. This message was for me, so I know you were with me until the end. And you know what's worse? Many people pride themselves on this, on how long they can go without eating, on how many days they can endure. But God never asked for effort for the sake of appearances. He asked for surrender with purpose. Fasting is when you say, Lord, I align myself with you, even if it costs me my will, my comfort, my logic. The big turning point is right there. Understanding that fasting is not about proving something to God. It is about recognizing that without Him, you can do nothing. It is not about you showing strength. It is about you recognizing your weakness. And at that point, the enemy loses the advantage, because while you fast trying to conquer, he still has room to manipulate you. But when you fast to surrender, then the war turns. What many people don't understand is that the devil doesn't fear fasting itself. He fears fasting with direction, with discernment. When you fast knowing what needs to be let go of, what needs to be resolved, what needs to be obeyed, hell trembles. Because fasting aligned with God's purpose brings light into areas that have been hidden for years. And here comes a hidden truth that unlocks a lot. God is not waiting for you to be stronger. He is waiting for you to say yes. Yes to the call, yes to renunciation, yes to the change you have been putting off. Fasting is just the setting. The decision is the plot. Many people live a performative spirituality, trying to achieve something that has already been given, but that requires action. You don't need to convince God to do something. He has already spoken. He has already shown. He has already pointed out. Now He expects you to stop asking for strength and start obeying with what you have. And here comes a detail that most people ignore. Fasting is not just about giving up food, it is about giving up resistance. Resisting forgiveness, reconciliation, the call, a change of mindset. It is about surrendering that part of yourself that you still want to keep in control. There are many people who fast while hungry, but without surrender. And that's why. They come out of the fast feeling weak, not strong. Because what renews you is not the fast itself, it's how much you move toward obedience during that period. Fasting is the opportunity to stop, be silent, and listen. But if, even in silence, you continue to ignore the direction, then what could be liberation becomes just weariness. Think about it. Have you ever noticed that the greatest spiritual breakthroughs come after a difficult yes? A yes to something you've been avoiding, a yes that requires maturity, humility, courage. True fasting is the preparation for this kind of response. It's not the end, it's the process. The question that needs to echo within you now is, what part of God's will am I still resisting? Maybe it's not something big or visible. It could be something internal, silent, discreet, but it's blocking everything. And the worst kind of prison is the one we don't even realize we're in, where we get used to the wait, the pain, the delay, and so we carry on, as if it were normal, as if God had accepted this dormant version of our faith, but He didn't, and neither should you. There is a huge difference between passing through a desert and building a tent in it. Fasting was made to get you through the desert, not to make you live there, but to do that, you need to follow the route. There's no point in running in circles waiting for a new destination. What changes the landscape is the direction, and that comes from the voice of God, not from our haste. And here, once again, we return to the root of the problem. You want change, but you still try to keep it under control. You still want to choose the rhythm, the steps, the timing, and in the meantime, God is waiting for only one movement: real surrender. The one that sets aside human logic, spiritual appearance, and says, "Lord, tell me that I will go. Show me that I will change. Demand that I surrender." Now I want to dig deeper into this thread because there is a specific type of resistance that seems spiritual, but is actually pride disguised as zeal. And that's what we need to talk about now. Comment here. That makes sense to me. Now, we need to touch on a point that changes everything. The language that heaven understands. It is not crying, it is not effort, it is not even sacrifice in itself. The language that God truly responds to is obedience. And this, as simple as it may seem, is what scares the human heart the most, because to obey is to give up control. It is to trust even without understanding. It is to walk even without seeing. It is to say, "Here I am," even when afraid. Think about Abraham. He didn't fast for days to show he was faithful. He didn't say a big public prayer to prove his faith. What moved heaven was the moment he laid his son on the altar, even though he didn't know how it would end. That wasn't about Isaac. It was about surrender. The raw, painful, almost insane trust of someone who obeys because they know, who they trust. And when he raised the knife, heaven responded. It wasn't the cut that released the promise, it was the surrender. God's favor came after obedience. Look at Jonah, the runaway prophet. He knew God. He had a word. He knew how to preach, but he preferred to run. And while he ran away from instruction, everything around him sank. Boat, relationships, peace. But deep in the belly of the fish, in the darkest, most isolated, most unlikely place, he surrendered. He didn't need to fast for 40 days. He needed to say, "Okay, I'll go." And as soon as obedience happened, the miracle happened. The fish spat him back out on course. God didn't want a perfect Jonah. God wanted a positioned Jonah. And of course, there is Jesus, the greatest example of all. The only one who didn't have to go through anything, but who went through everything. He fasted for 40 days, yes, but what moved the eternal plan was obedience to the end. In Gethsemane, he didn't ask to flee the cross because of a lack of faith. He felt the real weight of what it meant to obey. "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." But then came the phrase that breaks through any resistance, "But not my will, but yours be done." It was there that heaven sealed the victory. Sacrifice attracts attention, but obedience opens doors. The problem is that in our generation, obedience has become synonymous with loss, losing freedom, losing time, losing opportunities. When in fact, obedience is the only way to gain something that does not corrupt. Obedience places you in a territory where the results no longer depend on your strength, but on the faithfulness of the one who called you. It is as if God were saying, "Now that you have stepped down from the throne of your own life, I can rule." And this key changes everything, because there are people who get frustrated with God saying, "But I fasted, I prayed so much, I sacrificed myself," as if this were a bargaining chip. But God is never moved by performance. He is moved by obedience. Sometimes it is a simple yes, a forgiveness granted, a decision that seems small, but that unlocks entire destinies. When you understand this, your mindset begins to change. You stop fighting with the wrong weapons. You begin to realize that it's not about doing more, but about doing what God has told you to do. Some people are spiritually exhausted because they are doing too many things that God never asked them to do. Busy, overwhelmed, dedicated, but out of touch. And this disconnection exacts a high price. Because everything you do without cover, you have to support yourself. But when you obey, even when it's hard, heaven takes responsibility. God sustains what He has commanded you to begin. He provides in the middle. He protects in the midst of war. He responds with peace, even when everything around you is collapsing. That's why often the biggest step of faith isn't starting something new. It's finally obeying what has already been said. You don't need another confirmation. You don't need another sign. You just need the courage to align yourself. And you know what's interesting? When you obey, even God's silence becomes an answer. Because the peace that pervades is proof that you are on the right path, even without applause, even without guarantees, and this requires maturity. Because obeying is not acting only when everything makes sense. Obeying is trusting the one who is in charge, even when you don't understand the mission. It is accepting that heaven works according to another logic, with other deadlines, with other depth. That the impact of your obedience does not end with you, but extends to places you can't even imagine. The journey of faith is not about accumulating spiritual experiences. It is about the depth of decisions, and the deeper you go in obedience, the stronger you become in spirit. Not because you are shielded from struggles, but because you are grounded in the one who called you. Now I want to open up an even more delicate layer of this subject, because there is a very fine line between emotional resistance and false spirituality, and that is precisely where many hide, thinking they are being zealous, when, in fact, they are just afraid to obey. Comment here. Obedience challenges me. Now listen to me carefully, because this could be a turning point for many people. The fast that breaks cycles is not the longest nor the most rigorous. It is the most intentional, that which has a purpose. What starts with a sincere question and ends with a courageous decision. Because breaking spiritual cycles does not depend on effort, it depends on the decision. And if this content helped you see more clearly what God has been whispering to you, subscribe to the channel. Not only so you don't miss the next videos, but because this journey is ongoing, and walking together makes a difference. Oh, and leave your like too. This shows YouTube that this type of message is worth delivering to more people who are in the same invisible struggle. There is a video here that complements this subject and can bring even more clarity to your next decision. Click and continue with me there. The conversation is not over yet.